went tonight in the name of the CUNO, the Quakers United Nations Office, the Quaker Earthquake Witness, and the Friends World Community for Consultation and the ACT Alliance. As you all are aware, pretty aware, loss and damage is one of the hot issues here during this COP. But we are not negotiators, so we will not address the individual technical or whatever questions, but that doesn't say that we are not addressing hot questions, because for us as Christians it's a very hot question to talk about the moral call to conscience and to talk about a fair share in finance for people affected by loss and damage. So it's a different kind of hot questions. For the only negotiator in the room here, at least in the panel, it might be a bit strange how we are talking, but I think it's going to be an interesting evening, and I'm quite sure that we will find it enlightening, and you will leave the room maybe with some new ideas in your head. We would start by watching a video which has kindly been given to us by our panelists from Nepal, and it is a very impressive one, and after that one I will introduce our panelists of tonight. Please film.
कहिले कहाँबाट गान गाउँमा 4-5 रात हो म बसेन सुतेन छैन ओर्ने छुनीहरु के छ घर बनाइदिनु सकेको छैन मैले फेरि न मैले कहाँबाट ल्याएर तिर्नु के गरेर तिर्नु अब
सबै हाम्रो भएको जग्गा लागि हाल्यो अनि टारा बनाउनलाई पनि छैन अब हामी के गरौँ बर्खाभरिमा आज राति कत्रो त्यो हावा उडी आयो यो टारा उड्यो भने हामी कहाँ जाने भनेर त्यतिकै चिन्ता भइहाल्यो
Every year, Nepal faces different extreme weather events taking a significant toll on lives and livelihoods of the communities. This year, monsoon hit Nepal with a bang, dumping heavy rains in high mountains instead of mid-hills, a new phenomenon that perplexed climate scientists. Monsoon rains caused destructive landslides and floods across Nepal, killing 205 people and affecting over 1,600 families. Landslides and floods also damaged critical infrastructures such as lifeline roads, irrigation canals, and health facilities. During this monsoon, 113 flood events, 243 landslides, 312 heavy rainfalls, 72 thunderbolt events were reported throughout the country. The economic loss caused by monsoon-induced disasters amounted to about $5 million. The Himalayan river valley of Melamchi was particularly hit hard by intense monsoon rains. On 15 June 2021, a massive debris flood ravaged Melamchi Hilambu and other villages across the valley. 5 people were dead and 20 more presumed dead. The Melamchi flood was caused by unusually extreme rainfall in the upper reaches of the valley. A meteorology station located 22 km north of Melamchi recorded over 110 mm rainfall on 12 June, the highest ever in the area where snowfall is common instead of monsoon rains.
Immediately after the flood of June 2021, we mobilized to the field. From our field insights and associated analysis of secondary data, what we came to the conclusion is this is a kind of cascading of multi-hazard event, and the trigger is not a single one, but there has been a continuous rainfall for the last several days, which has saturated the nearby landmass and caused the landslide at the first trigger. which blocked the river water flow and stored certain volume of water at least for half an hour as indicated by the information. Given the steep topography or steep slope of the Melamchi River, the water flew along with the huge amount of energy, which generated a lot of material by coating the banks and the bed of the river, not at a couple of locations, but to the entire river. Cascading of multiple events generated a large amount of the debris and which were deposited in the Melamchi and nearby area to a significant amount by aggregating the riverbed by up to 15 meters at most of the locations.
The Melamchi floods buried 178 hectares of farmland, destroyed 259 small businesses, and cut off rural communities for weeks.
बस्नलाई पनि अब अलि अब त्यो जोखिम ठाउँ भयो जग्गा छैन खेत पनि सबै लग्यो घर छैन अब यतै पेट पाल्ने काम गर्नु पर्यो नि अब के गर्नु यो भन्दा अगाडि चाहिँ आफूले लगाउँथ्यो भने हैन अब यो भन्दा पछाडी आफै चाहिँ त्यस्तो गर्नुपर्ने अवस्था आयो
अकल्पनीय रूपमा इतिहासमै मलाई लाग्छ पहिलोचोटि बाढी पहिरोले चाहिँ त्यहाँको एउटा मानवीय र भौतिक संरचनाको हिसाबले हामी पूर्ण रूपमा क्षत-विक्षेद हुनुपर्ने परिस्थिति एकदम हाम्रो गाउँपालिका एउटा महाविपदमा बस्नु पर्यो हाम्रो बाटोघाटो हाम्रो कुलेस बस्ने नागरिकहरूको घर त्यसपछि लगायतका व्यवसायीहरू त्यसपछि पुलेसाहरू सबै मोटरेबल पुल झोलङ्गे पुलदेखि लगायतका त्यसपछि लिएर सडकको हिसाबले उज्यालोको हिसाबले बत्तीको हिसाबले सबै संरचनाहरू स्कुलहरूदेखि लगायतका सबै संरचनाहरू क्षत-विक्षेद भएको अवस्थाहरू अहिले हामीले झेलिरहेको अवस्था छ
The disaster severely impacted Melamchi water supply project, adding to the water woes of the Kathmandu Valley. However, the loss from the Melamchi disaster was reduced because of timely communication and rapid evacuation. The government led the relief distribution and provided temporary shelters and managed temporary road network. The Melamchi disaster shows that the Himalayan region has already reached the tipping point of climate change. Experts say the 5-day rainfall in the week between 10 to 15 June is just a trailer of the tragic trend of monsoon that will result into devastating events in coming years. Loss and damage, as debated in the past few years in the negotiations, has to be well recognized and enter into the formal UNFCCC process as a standalone agenda. Financing for loss and damage is crucial for a country like Nepal to respond effectively. We can save our planet and humanity if we act together. Future is in our hands.
As I promised you, that really let us in the midst of the problem and of the questions we would like to raise tonight. You can be assured that all our panelists are high experts in their field and have a very high reputation. This is the reason why I will not introduce them with all their merits and all their different capacities, but we would start with a first round of questions to each of them, which gives them the chance to introduce themselves personally, and I will only give a glimpse of what is their official work and their official title. So I will start with Dr. Radha Wagle. She is head of Climate Change Management Division, the Ministry of Forest and Environment in Nepal, has 20 years of experience in the field of forestry, biodiversity and climate change, with some special focus on gender equality and social inclusion. We start with the first question, which will be given to all. What drives you personally, Radha? What is the motivation? What is your motivation to address and to care about loss and damage? I mean, it was almost answered, but just a quick word from all of you. Only one sentence and not more, not the whole biography.
Maybe I no need to speak much because the video already spoke so much. We can see the pain of the people who are living in marginal land and they have no alternative. accept their small land and their own livelihood system. And that is devastated. The climate change-induced disaster has been increasing day by day, and the people in different land, not only in the hills, but in the plains, everywhere different kind of disaster has been happening. And that is the reality. Yeah. And that touched me. Yeah. And then I am currently working in the Ministry of Forest and Environment, and which is responsible to dealing with climate change policies and all the intervention in my country. Okay. And that is my responsibility, and that is that is our people's requirement. That two things drive me to work for loss and damage. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I recognize there's still this difference in culture, what we mean by a short answer. But please all, to all our panelists, the shorter, the better, so they have more time. But thank you very much, that was very informative. I would like to ask the same question to Mr. Söderberg, who is the Chief Executive Manager, one can say, or whatever, Chief Advisor of DanChurchAid in the area of climate change and development. And again, the question to you, what drives you personally and what motivates you to address this issue of loss and damage?
Thank you very much. I think the film was just, it's showing why this is so urgent. But for me personally, it's also an issue of a global challenge. This is the reality for Nepal right now. It may be the reality for Denmark, where I live, in a couple of generations. I don't know if my grandchildren or their children may be displaced and forced to move, because Denmark is so low-lying country. And I think this is a global challenge, and now we need to stand by those who are affected today.
Yeah, thank you. And now to Mr. Tunga Rai of the Rai Indigenous Nationality of Nepal. He is an anthropologist, and he is a national coordinator of the Nepal Federation of Indigenous Nationalities, NEFIN, and follows the UNFCCC process very closely since years, including climate finance discussions, and attends the board meetings on the Green Climate Fund. What motivates you?
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here and share my experiences and thoughts. First of all, you have seen the situation where I come from. You already know that what is there in the communities. I don't have to explain about the physical or economic losses and damages, but you might not have thought about the non-economic loss and the connection of peoples with those lands which has been damaged by those floods. Because as indigenous peoples, we have always been saying, and we think that we cannot see things in isolation. We cannot see people in isolation. We cannot see climate science in isolation. Science is knowledge, and everything is interconnected. No? Once those things are flooded, once those things are swept away, then the connection and the root of the knowledge, root of the totality is already swept away. Because those are not only the stones and rivers that have been damaged there, those are the root of the knowledge, indigenous science, I would say, those have been already, disconnected. So these kind of unheard and kind of unthought realities should be really come to the table and think about this and make decisions about those realities. That's where I'm inspired, and I'm here to share this kind of subaltern realities, unheard and unsaid realities to the world.
Thank you very much. And now we have Mr. Frodo Neergaard. He is the Danish loss and damage negotiator. And I don't know much about you, but you may introduce yourself while talking about your personal motivation of caring about loss and damage.
Thank you very much, Cornelia, and I'm so pleased to be here because I'm outside the negotiation room here and among good friends. And although this is a very grandiose setting here, I feel much more relaxed than negotiating this because, as you all know, it's been going on and it's still going on as we speak. So I'm a climate negotiator, but I'm also a development diplomat, climate diplomat, but more so I would say a development practitioner, because I've been living and working in the field, been posted abroad with my family for many years. And my approach to loss and damage, I think, is that we really need to move the challenge of loss and damage from a very general and very conceptual level down to a practical level. And that's what we are trying to do with my government. I'm in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is also DANIDA, the development arm of the Danish government. And our approach is we want to try to have a practical approach in addition to what we do here in Glasgow to reach agreement on some decisions related to loss and damage.
Thank you very much. And now we have Mrs. Olivia Hanks, and she is the Economics and Sustainability Program Manager of the Quakers in Britain, right? And has led on developing the advocacy work of the UK interfaith group Make COP Count. And it is up to you to explain a bit what drives you and what is it all about, this campaign.
Thank you. Yes, so I've been leading on the advocacy work of the Interfaith Coalition Make COP Count, which has brought UK faith groups together to coordinate responses in the run-up to COP26. And there was a very strong consensus that we wanted to put justice at the forefront of our work on the climate crisis and on COP26. And from there, we identified loss and damage, and particularly finance for loss and damage, as a key priority. And it's been really powerful and inspiring to see how UK faith voices have come together around this, and this conviction that we have a strong moral voice, and we need to use it to speak out for climate justice. I think alongside this is a very long-standing call from the Global South. We've been hearing demands for compensation, for loss and damage finance for 30 years now, and I think we need to stand in solidarity with people and communities in the Global South. We can't leave the countries most vulnerable to climate change to do this work on their own. We need a global north movement that is calling for justice and reparation. Thanks.
We need to leave something to say for the discussion. Thank you very much. So we heard about the motivation of seeing the pain, observing the pain of the marginalized people, the reality which has become a global reality for all our countries, the non-economic loss and damage issues like identity and culture, and the drive to make it really realistic and practical and work, and the demand to stand in solidarity. So thank you very much. It is maybe an uncommon way to address the loss and damage issue to talk about a fair share in finance for the people affected by loss and damage. Therefore, I would like to ask all of you, what does a fair share in finance in loss and damage mean to you, and what does it imply? What makes up for it? And how does this connect to climate justice? May I start again with you, Radha?
Thank you once again. I think the extreme change in weather and climate system are increasing the loss and damage in developing countries like ours. And as our colleague already mentioned, that may be the future of other countries too, that may arise in any part of the world in near future. And regarding our situation, the loss and damage has not accelerated as we wished in COP26, but we wish to have this agenda as an established agenda in terms of finance and in terms of other working mechanisms too. And we claim that the agenda of loss and damage should be the separate item and the third pillar of climate negotiation after adaptation and mitigation. And we want to see the full operationalization of Santiago network and on loss and damage, and its mandate to provide action and support for vulnerable developing countries. And of course, the finance is the key responding effectively to the climate-induced disasters, and it is therefore important to establish a loss and damage finance facility with new and additional loss and damage finance, because the adaptation finance cannot cover the loss and finance if it goes like this. And it is also important to ensure the inclusion of loss and damage in the discussion of new financial goals, which will establish after 2025. And the outcome into effect of 2025 onwards, with new and additional source and level of finance. For us, that is new financial mechanism that we can incorporate in the climate finance mechanism.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. And let me now turn to Mr. Mattias.
Yes, thank you. Well, climate justice is our slogan. So in that way, it's a really important matter for us. But we also know that justice and fairness is controversial and difficult concepts. I think what we really need to focus on when we talk about fairness and justice in terms of climate finance is that polluters pay, and those who are affected by loss and damage now need support. We cannot say no to anyone who is in the need of urgent support due to loss and damage, because loss and damage is, as in this context, caused by climate change, linked to global warming, linked to emissions. So there's need to support, there's a moral need to support those affected.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And I follow the order from before and turn to you. What does a fair share mean for you? What would it imply? Fair share can be many things and can be nothing. So it's very vague still, but it's up to you to fill that.
No, thank you. Again, I would like to bring you back to the video, and there is the answer already, who is responsible for this loss and damage, but the most important question is who is hardest the most, and the answer is those people who don't have access to facilities, who don't have access to decision making, and also the alternative livelihoods are the most vulnerable and most hardest hit ones. So then the fair share, we talk about common but differentiated responsibilities, but you know, the hardest hit people have very little access to the finance, to the justice, because the human face of climate change is very different. Even if it's environmental, it's a natural phenomena, it has human face. So the physical face and the economic face is very clear, but the non-economic and the software part of the loss and damage is really underground. We really have to dive to realize that losses, and there is the fair share. Who has to get the biggest share or the proportional just share? So who is responsible for this loss and damage? So you know the answer. And who are hittest hard? You know the answer. So we really need to pay for loss and damage to the most vulnerable ones. And for this, you know, fair share, not only for economic, but also the non-economic losses that goes forever. It doesn't come back again. We lose things forever. So how do we really pay the fair share for those kind of phenomena? This is the thing we really need to think through. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now to you.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think it's partly difficult, but also an easy answer, I would say. It's all about a paradox, and I think you alluded to it just now, Dr. Radha, that those that have contributed the least are those that suffer most. And that's the starting point that we need to realize. And those that suffer most are also those with the most limited resources, the least capacity. So obviously there is an obligation to see what we can do from developed countries. I used to negotiate earlier on what we call the polluter pays principle. So I don't use that so much more, but actually there's some truth in this, I think. It's very, very difficult to define a fair share, I would say. But at least, because it, as you also said, Cornelia, it can be, you know, anything. And there's not a price tag on the cost of loss and damage. But what we do know is it will only, unfortunately, go in one direction. I think we will have more frequent climate-induced loss and damage, more severe climate-induced loss and damage. And this is why here in Glasgow we're trying to address this challenge and also to address the question of making resources, both financial and technical, available to assist those that suffer most.
Thank you very much. And then finally to you, Olivia.
I think it's worth stating perhaps the obvious, which is that loss and damage is fundamentally unfair. This is an immense moral wrong that's been done to the Global South through centuries of colonialism and extraction. But what we can do, rich and powerful countries can do, is to use some of that wealth and power to repair some of the harm that has been done. And I think fairness or fair shares kind of sounds like a vague ethical principle, but actually one of the things that I think is really exciting about this is that work has been done to quantify climate fair shares through the Climate Equity Reference Project of the Stockholm Environment Institute. And that takes into account a country's historical contribution, its cumulative contribution to climate change, and its capability to act, and uses that to calculate that country's fair share of emissions reductions. And in the case of rich countries like the UK, the historical big emitters, actually, however fast we cut our own emissions, we cannot do our fair share. So that also has to include finance for a transition. What it doesn't include is finance for loss and damage, so that is another bill on top of that.
Yeah,
and I would, so to quickly say, I'd echo what colleagues have said about the polluter pays principle, and again, there are proposals out there for how that can be implemented through things like a fossil fuel tax.
We cannot explore them all right now. Thank you very much. So I hear from all of you that the major thing first, it starts with acknowledging the losses and damages, and all the losses and damages, including the non-economic ones, those on culture and identity, which is not acknowledged, I think, enough among many people in society and in politics, and acknowledge who has the major responsibility, acknowledge who has the capacity, the capability, the resources to answer that, to bring all this together in the picture, together with the historical contributions. Of course, this is about responsibility. There is no price tag, but definitely resources are shared differently in our world. It is a very unequal share of resources, and the opposite one is the share of suffering from loss and damage. Thank you. Now, let me come to you again, please, and ask, ensuring loss and damage plans are responsive to the needs of people who bear the brunt of climate change is of utmost importance. So ensuring that this is the case, what is of utmost importance to the LDC group then? What is their role and potential in climate negotiations?
Yeah, I think I already mentioned also that we want to have ask that we need to have the loss and damage agenda equally important as adaptation and mitigation agenda. That is the first one. And the second one is we need to address it through institutional and financial mechanism so that we can avert and minimize and reduce the loss and damage in countries' context. and for that, maybe we need some capacity and other support. That is our key ask, or key recognition in this agenda.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I forget in my summary before to say that to have a separate fund or to separate instruments and to have a full recognition as equal important as mitigation and adaptation.
Yeah, yes. That is of course a fair share.
Yes, yes, thank you. Mattias, can, and if so, what can faith actors bring to negotiations table on a transformative post-2025 finance agreement? And so, other way around, do we have any USP, unique selling point, or a specific gift or role as churches, as faith actors to contribute?
I think faith actors, not just Christians, but all the different faith actors have an important role to play because they have an important role to play in society and communities around the world. And we have an important role both in terms of supporting people in the need through our different activities, but also here in the political space and in the political space in our different countries, where we can have a dialogue with decision makers, politicians and authorities, sharing our experiences based on our values so I think we play an important role both here, but also when governments go home, we will be there as well.
And I'm quite sure you played that role already in advance of COP. So not only during COP and afterwards, but in advance, so in between constantly. Yes, thank you. Mr. Rai, knowing that climate change is enhancing the effects of inequality and of structural injustice, and that it threatens the human rights, especially of the most marginalized groups, even more, how then to ensure that this will not be perpetuated but counteracted, or how to ensure that more justice will be given to indigenous people?
Thanks again. Yeah, as I said, climate change has a lot to do with human activities and human behavior. It's not, climate change itself is not a phenomenon. It really has to do with the human behavior. So when we say that, I think about, it brings me back to my own reality, back to the village. And then, for example, I can give you the example. The World Leaders Summit Declaration on Action on Forest and Land Use, then that really draw our mind and somehow, threaten us also. It's an opportunity, but where this action will be taken place, that's in the land, that's in the forest, that's clear. Then you see the loss and damage, but that also applies with mitigation, climate mitigation and adaptation. If it's there in the land, then what about the human rights? What about the rights of indigenous peoples to land, territories and resources? So there are a lot of things. It takes time to discuss about all of these things, but precisely climate change itself is hitting us a lot, but also climate action, including climate policies, loss and damage policies, and other things have posed quite some challenges to indigenous peoples, because sometimes the policymakers, like distinguished panelists, might not be aware of the fact that there are different realities on the ground. It's not that you don't want to listen to us, but the fact is that we have not been able to bring it to the table and into your reading. So there is multiple layers of challenges. So that really has threatened human rights and the rights of indigenous people. That's why we are saying, please ensure human rights and the rights of indigenous people in all climate action, including in Article 6, including in loss and damage. You don't have to start from zero. There is already preamble section of Paris Agreement that ensures all of those things. And there are already baselines and foundations, so we don't have to worry about, the overcrossing or overstepping, but just build on the basis, but secure human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples. That really helps us to create win-win situation. Thanks.
Thank you. And I have a second question to you, since you are following the and participating in the Green Climate Fund meetings. What role can the Green Climate Fund play in that future, and how does it need maybe to be adjusted for being able to play that role for a more fair share in climate financing?
Yeah, if we limit our discussion on loss and damage, then of course Green Climate Fund needs to have mandate from the COPs to say that they can support loss and damage through the specific window and having dedicated window for loss and damage. But this is yet to be decided in Standing Committee on Finance, I guess. But if we see in the existing structure of Green Climate Fund, then there is no dedicated window to fund support loss and damage. However, Green Climate talks about paradigm shift, Green Climate talks about climate rational, and etc. So in the definition of paradigm shift, now really what is paradigm shift? If Green Climate Fund wants to do business, something different from business as usual to shifting a paradigm, then what is fundable project? It could be supporting indigenous people's worldviews and livelihood, which I have already said that is interconnected with the nature, is interconnected with the integrity of the environment and climate. So really, GCF has to go into that details. Otherwise, I would say GCF funding project is business as usual. It has to shift the paradigm. What is fundable project? And how to bring civil society and indigenous peoples in decision-making processes, because now we are recognized only as observer, and we are not in the decision-making table, and we are not provided sufficient space to share those kind of things. So at two levels. One is in the process, how we can be involved, and second is in the essence, in the contents of the project. So GCF has opportunities to think through these two levels.
Thank you very much. And Frodo, how does Denmark want to address the issues raised under loss and damage, and how is it maybe considered in the context of Denmark's new development cooperation strategy?
Thank you for asking that question, because I brought our new strategy here. Oops. And it's written into our new strategy that we need to work on loss and damage. But let me start somewhere else, because I think the main challenge that we are having as a government, that is that it's been quite difficult to find the right approach to really work on loss and damage. And this is in spite of the fact that it's written into the Paris Agreement. There's an article about it in the Paris Agreement. Now that's back to COP21, and we even started at COP19 with the Warsaw International Mechanism. So it's not that there has not been things that we have agreed on, but action has been very limited. And it's simply been because we have not been able to really find the right approach. I'm saying this while also saying I think our government, and through our development cooperation, we've been doing quite a lot that actually addresses loss and damage in various ways, but we have not necessarily labeled it as loss and damage. We are, relatively speaking, because Denmark is a small country, we're a big humanitarian donor. Within our humanitarian engagements, we've been addressing loss and damage, weather-related, climate-induced extreme weather event and catastrophes. So it's not that we've not been doing anything, but we have not been, we've been shy of using the words loss and damage, I must confess. Our minister did it at a side event just a few weeks ago and on his Twitter account. And it's interesting to see the reactions, because some were saying, oh, your minister is using the words loss and damage. It almost comes as a surprise to some. And that's telling. So I want to say this because our minister and as Denmark, we are ready to engage even more than what we have been doing, and we are working together with our partners to find the right ways to do so.
So this is rather about finding the right way to do so than rather the right words. And this, before we heard it is important, but to address the issue, so find a balance between this in words and in doing.
Yes, indeed. I think we should not be shy of using the word loss and damage, because that's what it's all about. But I would also like to say that we started off, and I would say thanks to Mattias, who's also in this panel, we worked, we held an international workshop in June this year, together with DanChurchAid and together with Guinea. And the purpose of this workshop was to say, let's sit down and talk about how can we practically work with this. Let's share the ideas. Let's showcase the examples on projects that we've already worked with. And I thought it was a very good exchange of experiences and perspectives on how we can move forward on this and scale up our efforts together.
Thank you. And since this, the subject of this and the title of this evening's Cited Event is a moral call to conscience, what values are guiding the Danish government debates around loss and damage?
Oh, that's a big question in a sense, because as a development person, development diplomat, and having worked with development cooperation for very many years, what is it that drives us to allocate funding for development cooperation and for poverty-related engagement with our partner countries? I would like to say it's altruism, but I know that's not the full story, unfortunately. I mean, there is also some degree of self-interest. I mean, we would basically like to make sure that everyone has, you know, a decent life across the entire world. And I think that's what drives Denmark as a provider of development finance.
Thank you. Mrs. Hanks or Olivia, what do you believe, how can the civil society help after the COP increase understanding of the moral and political need for a fair share and a human rights-based approach for loss and damage? And do this increase this understanding in your society as well as among politicians?
So I want to briefly mention three things. I think loss and damage sounds very technical, and I think it's maybe perhaps at this COP and in the run-up to this COP, it's started to make it out of that technical space and being talked about much more by movements, by activists, which I think is a very positive step. Because behind that technical language, really, these are just real life, these are stories of people's lives, people losing their lands, their livelihoods, their homes. And that is a very, we can speak to people's emotions when we tell those stories. So I think faith communities, like other civil society groups, have a role to play. In particular, with faith groups, we often have connections across borders where we can share those stories of people who are living this reality now. And relatedly, I think we need to model empathy. I think in the UK, we've seen a quite severe deterioration of public and political discourse over the last few years. I think we need to relearn empathy and take it seriously as a muscle that needs exercising, because loving our neighbour isn't just a warm, fuzzy feeling, it's about practical solidarity. And our actions have global consequences, and so the people feeling those consequences of climate breakdown are our neighbours too. And finally, I'd say I think we need to talk about historical responsibility. I think it's something that's really resonated with Quakers that I work with when we've talked about this, is to say that this isn't about charity, this isn't about aid, this is a debt that the rich world owes to the poor. I think our faith traditions probably all, I think, have teachings about justice. I think that we have work to do to connect that and help people make the connections with what that means for our response to the climate crisis.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And can you explain why and how loss and damage is a moral call for consciousness?
So as I said, I think these discussions can seem very technical, and of course, especially in spaces like this, by their nature, people are deep in the technical detail and the nitty-gritty. And I think faith groups and other civil society groups, part of our role here is to remind those making the decisions of what's really at stake, that these are people's lives. I think it's very important that we view this through a human rights lens as well, because in the end, it's about the right to life, to water, to food, to shelter, to self-determination. All of this is what is at stake when we talk about loss and damage. And I think as the moral call to conscience, well, what is the legacy that we want to leave? Because this is what we do now is what the next generation will inherit. They will inherit not just our mess, whatever mess we may make, but they will take up our example in the way that we act. And so I think sometimes in these spaces, talking about morality and conscience can be perhaps dismissed as naive. And I suppose my message to the people who are now working on finalising the outcome of COP26 would be, you might think that this doesn't come into it, that you're making your decisions based on logic and practicality and evidence, but actually all of us have a moral compass. It underpins everything that you do, and I think we need to call on the people who are making these decisions to really not be afraid to engage that moral compass, to hear that call of their neighbour across the world perhaps, and understand that it's not yet too late to look up and see that and answer that call.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all our panelists. This was a full bunch of flowers, so to speak. And now you've got your chance to come up with questions for clarification, of course, but rather maybe substantive questions and comments of all kinds. We have got 2 microphones on each side. Here you see them run in the front of the room. If you want to raise a question, please line up behind the microphones or go to one of the microphones. Remove your mask so that we can really hear you. It's a difficult acoustic in this room. At least it's not easy for me to hear you. If possible, please say to whom you want to address the question as well. So you are invited. Yes, please, just go to one of the mics and then you can speak.
Okay, I'm Kaganga John, and I'm a climate change practitioner and an activist from Uganda. This is a very good topic, but it is good we have also negotiators who are here. But again, it is also the work of the civil society organization to advocate, because as far as loss and damage, we still have a problem. When do we talk of compensation or do we talk of support to determine whether someone, when is financing, is fair? That is one. 2, we have also another problem. It has been discussed, but I'm just bringing it out vividly, that there is a humanitarian. When you are supporting, is it a humanitarian aid? That is something also very tricky. And then also we mentioned about adaptation. They give, the money come for financing climate change, but it goes in climate change adaptation. Therefore, as I'm concluding, I would request that there is a particular window for loss and damage, and other windows like adaptation, mitigation, and so forth. Unless that is well stipulated, I think it might be also a big problem even to donors, because even donors are still reluctant. Many of them say we are funding climate change, but they fund climate change mitigation and adaptation, and now when we talk loss and damage, there is no proper window. Therefore, it has to be discussed and agreed upon by the donors and also by the whole global community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We would collect some questions and statements or comments. Yes, please go to the microphone, and then would have a final round of answering them.
Thank you. I think it was really a good panel discussion. I'm Bimal Regni. I'm from Nepal. So I just want to throw this question to the panelist from Denmark who is leading the negotiation. So we just heard in the previous session that Scotland has, announced $2 million, and the Scottish government has clearly recognized loss and damage as one of the important issues, and they have also recognized that loss and damage needs, standalone recognition as well as a finance, additional finance on that. So what is the thinking of Denmark government on this? Are you going to announce similar kind of financial pledges on loss and damage as additional finance? Because we really want to have more negotiators or more country governments to follow Scottish initiative. And this is really, you have seen the video of Nepal, so you can see the reality how people are really facing. You can see the pain and sorrow, whether they don't really care about these negotiations or texts or anything. It is the reality, it is the reality in the ground. So are we serious about these realities in the ground? Are we really serious about these mankind who are suffering? If so, why are we really debating on these technical issues, whether it should be part of adaptation or not? So I think I really request the government of Denmark to come up with very strong statements, really supporting loss and damage as Scottish government. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any further? Yes, please. You need not raise your hand. You just go, just go and go to any mic, and then you can immediately start talking.
Good evening. My name is Annika. I work for Bread for the World as a policy advisor for climate change. And I was just thinking, we have heard loss and damage for, as you said, more than 30 years, where people started to claim it in the vulnerable countries. But I remember in Bali, and it was in 2007, I think I remember, we had that coming up in the UNFCCC, and now it's 14 years later, and people still ask to recognize loss and damage, right? So I was just thinking, if we really want to wait until the governments come up with some money, as Scotland did, for example, do you think there's any other way we can canalize money? I was just speaking to someone from Nepal earlier today, and she came up with an idea of partnerships between cities or districts globally. So do you think this could be a way to canalize money quicker? For example, have a partnership between a Danish city and a city in Nepal or a district. Is this something you could imagine to make sure it will be speed up? Otherwise, we'll be there in 20 years talking about loss and damage. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. So the first one was very much in line with what had been said here, that there should be, especially you mentioned that there should be a separate window, there should be a separate instrument and separate funding for loss and damage, not just for adaptation and mitigation. I don't know who wants to react to that one. Yes, Mattias?
Yes, I would just like to, it was also mentioned, referred to the compensation, and I think Ideally, I mean, we need compensation. It's a question of compensation. But we also need to acknowledge that in the negotiations, this is really a tricky thing, because in the Paris Agreement, it's actually even a small paragraph saying that you should not call it compensation. For the people who are affected, I don't think the word is the most important. The most important is that there is support. There must come money. There must be support available. So if it's so controversial to talk about compensation, okay, let it go. But this money must still come. And the support must still come. And we still have a moral commitment to deliver the support. So that's an important thing. And then just a quick on the last point as well. I think we should acknowledge that there are already some experiences of supporting or addressing loss and damage. We have, for example, in DanChurchAid, we do have several projects which are focused on addressing loss and damage. So there are some money flowing, but the problem is that it's not acknowledged as a category in the debate, and thus we cannot monitor, we cannot gather the experiences, because we do not have an agreed definition, we do not have an agreed concept for loss and damage. So there's still a lot to do, because we need to learn quickly of the experiences we have.
Thank you. Yes. There was this question from the person from Nepal asking whether and how maybe Denmark could become encouraged, let me put it in my words, to follow its example by making serious attempts to address the situation of the people on the ground, and to find finances, and to come up with pledges. What do you think about that?
Yes, I have listened, of course, carefully to the questions from Uganda, Nepal, and also the lady from Bread from the World. And first of all, I'm a climate negotiator. I'm not a politician, I should say, at the outset. But I think we are scaling up. We may not have been doing so far as Scotland was doing, and somehow, okay, Scotland was the first, but maybe not the last. Hopefully not the last. I can't tell whether Denmark will go along that particular route, but I do know that we will scale up our efforts. And just last week, our minister announced a relatively big contribution to an early warning system set up by the World Meteorological Organization called Strategic Observations Financing Facility. It's just one example. There are several other examples. We're also supporting, through the Danish Red Cross, early warning systems in countries, even I think in Nepal for that matter, but Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mali. So we are doing things, and we would like to scale up. And we may not immediately satisfy those that say, oh, you've got to set up a fund that is labeled loss and damage. I can't tell, because that's a political decision, unfortunately. I can't tell. But what I can tell is that it's written into our development strategy, and we will scale up. But exactly how we will do it will also depend on getting better knowledge about this. I think Mattias alluded to that as well. And that's why we held the workshop. And we will also, through the Santiago network, hopefully get this network going, where much better understanding can be collected and energized, so that we can increase action and support, also technical support for that matter.
Thank you. We had the question whether instead of waiting for settling the debate about the wording, one could speed up at least the financing and speed up programs, and so that would help the poor communities by different alliances, by different ways of addressing it, not waiting maybe only for governments. Climate change, to address climate change invites, as we all know, different stakeholders. And why cannot other stakeholders take up the initiative and do more for loss and damage? That's how I understood the question. Who wants to respond to that? Anybody? Yes, please.
Yeah, friends from Uganda also touched a little bit up the nature of loss and damage, and also a colleague from UK. Indeed, loss and damage is also a humanitarian matter, but also the human rights matter. Because now we are also talking about financing, we are not talking about loss and damage, also we are talking about loss and damage, how to finance loss and damage. You know, if we talk about climate finance, it's really kind of myth for the peoples on the ground. If you see the climate finance you put in the big mechanisms, then 40% of the budget goes to the administration cost of the huge organization who are the delivery partners, or different terms are called. And the 60% money goes to the country, and imagine what percent of the money goes down to the ground. So the alternative channels, no? That's why we say how the climate finance is accessible, transparent. So the accessibility is the key question here. Now, if we really don't want to get our money lost, 40% of money lost along the way it goes through, then we really have to think about it. And then the other thing is climate finance. It's not really the official development aid. We even don't call donors. You may like it or may not like it. We call it contributors, at least in the G-shaped family. You are contributors. They are contributors because it's the responsibility. That is the human face of climate finance or climate action. So really it's the responsibility. It's not the donation. So, you know, if it's the responsibility, then we really think about the quicker channel and accessible channel.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, I think it's I got you by saying that it is of utmost importance, of course, that the money, however it comes, however it is labeled, really reaches the most vulnerable and those who are really the mostly affected but not able to get out of that situation by own means, but rather they need some kind of support. And the question is then, are those channels which would be used so far by development aid or humanitarian aid, are they really accessible for that purpose and accessible for the people? And would it really go straight to their support? Maybe you can say something to that one.
Sorry, can you...
The question was, once we are labeling it different, we are not talking about loss and damage financing, but we are talking about development aid or humanitarian aid. How can we assure that it really will reach the people on the ground and how they can access with the money themselves? So for their own defined plans, their own needs, and how would they be able to appeal for that rather than donors deciding who is getting the money?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think that's a good point, because it's not only about the quantity of finance, it's also about the quality and accessibility. Mm-hmm. And we are talking, in fact, quite a lot about that. Denmark, what we are doing is the finance that we are providing is entirely grants. That's the first thing to me, because there are other forms of providing finance. It can be loans or whatever. But I think in this particular case, loans is definitely not the right thing. Mm-hmm. So grant-based, being a grant-based donor, that's the first thing. Accessibility is another thing, because, and we are working at the board of the Green Climate Fund, at the board of GEF, at the board of other multilateral funds to ensure that funds become more accessible and we reduce the bureaucracy that normally is attached to submitting applications and all this. I should also say that we are happy that we actually signed on to the principles on locally led adaptation. I listened to what was said by, I think, the gentleman from, was it Uganda, saying adaptation is different. Yes, but just to say, in the old days when I worked in Uganda, by the way, we called it community-based support, right? We find new words. Now we could call it locally led. But the point is, we must involve the communities in the engagement in the work that we are doing. We must listen to what are the needs, and we must involve the communities. And I think that's been a brand mark of if you will, quite a lot of what Denmark has been doing over 40, 50 years. I'm so old, I've been along this journey for so long time, so I've seen it. But yes, it's a valid point. Quantity, yes, we need more finance. Quality, yes, but also accessibility and involving those that we wish to reach out to and those that actually suffer.
I'm tempted to raise a more theoretical, rhetorical question, but it's a very important one in these debates. That one could say, what is even at the end of the day more important? Is it the real flow of money, or is it words? But when we talk about words, just to give you a couple of words which have been mentioned here to show the dimension, then ask you to respond to them. Humanitarian or human rights, responsibility, donation, even loans. I mean, that's a third category you rightly mentioned, which is, I think, far away from whatever we think here in this room. It's absolutely no adequate reaction, no adequate response to the question. So, who wants to respond to that? Just give a statement on that. Olivia or Mattias or Olivia?
I think this needs a whole movement behind it, right? We need to be really talking about this issue much more, and so there's going to be a spectrum of proposals and approaches to this. So I think we need the kind of pragmatic approach where we say, look, how do we get this money? How do we get some money the fastest that we can and get it to where it's needed? I think we also need the movement of people on the streets calling for reparations. I think we need to be starting a conversation about what reparations actually means. So I think we need both of those things. I also want to very briefly, because I think somebody asked a question about whether we can sort of bypass national governments to speed this up, which I think is related in terms of, is it just about getting the money as quickly as we can? And I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's likely that any approach like that would probably fall far short of the scale of finance that's needed. And there's a risk then, I think, that governments simply continue to kind of abdicate their responsibilities and say, well, it's charity, it's being dealt with. I think the things that make me feel that maybe times have changed and there will be progress, we will see progress, is that, well, the first one is kind of a negative thing, which is that we're now in the era of loss and damage, right? And I know this isn't brand new to many, in many parts of the world, but I think we've all seen these impacts escalating, this year. I think also the threat of litigation is looming large now for the big polluters. Attribution science has moved on very, very quickly. And so I think that we are in a different era in terms of the pressure that the big emitters and the fossil fuel industry is going to be feeling on this. And finally, I think the movement in rich countries is now talking about this. And so I think, yes, of course, it's important. We need to find the ways to get the money there the quickest that we can. But I do think there are reasons to hope that actually we are starting to see a shift.
Somebody else who wants to respond, but otherwise we still have a question. I did recognize that you are standing at the mic. Mattias, you still want to?
No, I would.
Or any? No, please, just if there's another. Okay, then please go ahead.
Yes, my name is Per Ivar Woje from Norway, representing the Church of Norway here. But I'm also actually by profession a soil scientist. I studied soil erosion from Tanzania, and I've been working with development work also in Ethiopia and Madagascar. My question is a little bit maybe controversial in this context, because when it comes to kind of pinpointing what was the course of a disaster, it is in most cases it's a multitude of reasons or a multitude of aspects playing together. Like in the case of a flooding event, you may definitely say that if you have measurements saying that the rainfall intensity and amount of rainfall has increased, then, and that was the main reason for the event, definitely that is climate change induced. But if there is a change in the watershed management caused by increased population, or if there is an implementation of some disturbance within the watershed caused by governmental construction of a dam or a road, then that may be the main reason for the event to be so serious as it were. So all these kind of considerations need also to be added into the equation when we try to find out whether this is a loss and damage event or not. So sometimes it's not, I mean, it is worthwhile also to take the time to get these things in the right manner and to get this to get the description and the conditions right, because I don't think anyone will have a benefit if there is case where someone gets international money out of something which is later on proven to be a mismanagement by a local government, for instance. So just raising this as a maybe a complicated issue, but
do you want to raise that as a question to someone here sitting on the panel?
No, it's just to lift the case into the panel and to hear if you have any comments to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Who is having? Yeah, any comments, please? Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
Well, I want to thank the Norwegian soil scientist for this for the pointing this out, and I won't offer a long answer to it, but I think in our case, to me, my scientist colleagues tell me it's about attribution, and you may probably know what that means. So, what do you attribute a certain loss or damage or catastrophe to? So I'll just leave it there and say yes, it's a valid point. But I think we will have to rely on our scientists. We'll have to rely, including on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, because they are doing serious work about this, and then see, okay, what is what. And I think there's no doubt about it that these events, climate-induced weather events or catastrophes, they will grow irrespective of what you said.
Mm-hmm. You want to?
Yeah. Not directly to the question and discussion here, but let me take this opportunity to share my impression here. It's really amazing to see that the developed country citizens are so aware of climate change and climate action. I have seen that every day outside and during the march. That's really, really hopeful, and the piece of hope. And also, I'm really pleased to share with you that Nepal's NDC is one of the most efficient NDCs according to the reports, and also one of the most inclusive, progressive NDCs. So I would like to conclude with these two hopes from home and also from Glasgow.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are heading to the end of this evening site event, and we have to be obedient to the clock which is before my eyes. I recognize that I didn't introduce myself because I was speeding up and you make the best use of our time, so I shall still say that. My name is Cornelia Füllkrug-Weitzel. I have been working 21 years as president of Bread for the World, which is a Christian NGO, development NGO in Germany, as well as with Diaconia Emergency Aid, which is on humanitarian aid. I've been serving in the ACT Alliance in several capacities and positions. Now I'm the ACT Alliance Climate Justice Ambassador, and I'm a member of our governmental council on sustainability. Thank you very much for your not only attendance, but patience and interest, as I could saw in your faces. We are remaining with many questions. Why should we be able to solve them all in this very moment once politicians and other civil society members would discuss that for years? But I think we did not discuss the scientists, neither the negotiators dimension of it in a detail, but rather try to show how our faith, whatever it be, Christian faith or any other religion, would drive us to take up the issue and to be very, very serious about to leave no one behind. This is not, it doesn't refer to the Bible directly. It's not a quotation, but it could be a Bible quotation. So I think that was the major push tonight, to say leave no one behind. However you do that, wording, wording is important, and we need to find the right approach and the right narrative. The narrative and the approach matter, really matter. It makes the difference in the quality, as we have been saying. So, but cannot be solved tonight. I hope you, once you go home, you bring some new ideas or thoughts with you, and I'm sure you will continue the discussions at other places with other people, and we will soon find solutions, very quickly find solutions how we can effectively support the communities already right now, and later on find some solutions, latest maybe next COP, how to address the issue in a proper way. Thank you very much, and have a nice evening.